She signed the divorce papers on a rainy Tuesday, handing them to her husband of 6 years while he still wore the black suit from his mother's funeral, completely unaware that the broken man standing in their doorway had just inherited an $800 million empire. The same company where she worked, the same company her new lover managed, the same company that now belonged entirely to the husband she'd just abandoned. She divorced him to marry his boss, a man who'd been his closest friend, a man who smiled at the funeral while secretly planning to steal his wife. But neither of them knew the devastating truth buried in the lawyer's letter, sitting unopened on the kitchen counter. He was a grieving bookstore owner, drowning in debt, or so she believed, but he owned the towers where she typed emails, the accounts her new husband desperately managed, the entire corporate kingdom his mother had built in silence and shadows. What would happen when the wife who dumped him for a richer, more powerful man discovered that the husband she'd thrown away like garbage actually owned the $800 million contract her new husband had been bragging about winning? What would she do when she realized the company they worked for, the wealth they worshipped, the success they celebrated, all of it belonged to the man whose heart she'd shattered? And what would he do when the vultures came circling back, smelling money, wearing fake smiles, begging for forgiveness they'd never deserved? The cemetery stretched gray and endless under the November rain, each headstone a silent witness to grief that refused words. Daniel Morrison stood alone at the fresh grave, his worn black suit hanging loose on shoulders that had forgotten how to carry weight, his eyes fixed on the name carved into granite, Eleanor Morrison, beloved mother. The funeral had ended an hour ago, but he couldn't leave, couldn't move, couldn't accept that the only person who'd ever truly loved him was gone. His mother had raised him alone after his father disappeared, working long hours at jobs she never discussed, always coming home exhausted but smiling, always making sure he had everything he needed even when she went without. She died suddenly, a heart attack, the doctor said, and now Daniel stood in the rain wondering how he'd survive without her steady presence, her quiet encouragement, her unconditional faith in him. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he ignored it. Probably another creditor calling about the bookstore. Another bill he couldn't pay. Another reminder that his small business was drowning while bigger chains swallowed the neighborhood. He'd opened Morrison's Books 3 years ago, with money his mother had helped him scrape together, a dream she'd supported even when everyone else called him foolish. The store barely broke even most months, and lately it had been losing money steadily, but it was his, a place where lonely readers found community, where kids discovered magic between covers, where his mother had sat in the corner chair on Sunday afternoons, reading mysteries and drinking tea. Now that chair would stay empty forever. The rain soaked through his jacket, cold water running down his neck, but Daniel welcomed the discomfort. It matched the hollow ache in his chest, the exhaustion that had settled into his bones. His wife Jennifer hadn't come to the funeral. She'd claimed she had an important work meeting, something about a major contract presentation, and he'd been too grief-stricken to argue. Their marriage had been strained for months anyway, ever since the bookstore started struggling, ever since his best friend Marcus got promoted to regional manager at Quantum Enterprises where Jennifer worked in marketing. Marcus had been supportive during the funeral planning, calling every day, offering to help with arrangements. But Jennifer had been distant, distracted, her eyes sliding away from his whenever he tried to talk to her about how he was feeling. Daniel finally turned away from the grave, his shoes squelching in mud as he walked toward his old Honda, parked at the cemetery gate. He needed to get home, needed to check on the bookstore, needed to pretend that life continued even when it felt like the world had ended. The drive back to their apartment took 20 minutes through rain-slicked streets, past the gleaming Quantum Towers downtown where Jennifer spent her days, past the coffee shop where he and Marcus used to meet for basketball games on weekends before Marcus got too busy with his new responsibilities. The city looked different somehow, colder and more indifferent, as if his mother's death had stripped away some protective layer he hadn't known existed. The apartment was dark when he opened the door, and something felt wrong immediately. The living room looked bare, emptier than it should. Daniel flipped on the lights and saw that Jennifer's decorative pillows were gone from the couch, her plants missing from the windowsill. the framed photos of her family absent from the bookshelf. His heart started hammering as he walked toward the bedroom, each step heavy with dread he didn't want to name. The closet door stood open, revealing empty hangers where Jennifer's clothes had hung that morning. Her dresser drawers gaped vacant. Her shoes, her jewelry box, her laptop, all gone. A manila envelope sat on the bed, his name written across it in Jennifer's precise handwriting. Daniel's hands shook as he picked it up, already knowing what he'd find inside, but unable to stop himself from looking. Divorce papers. The words blurred as he tried to read them, his vision swimming with tears he thought he'd used up at the cemetery. She'd filed weeks ago, he realized, checking the dates. While his mother was dying, while he was drowning in grief, Jennifer had been planning her exit. There was a note paper clipped to the front page, her handwriting sharp and businesslike. Daniel, I can't do this anymore. You're a good person, but I need stability and a future. Marcus and I are together now. He can give me what you can't. The apartment lease is in your name. I've taken what's mine. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Jay. The room spun around him. Marcus, his best friend since college. The guy who'd been best man at their wedding, who'd helped him move furniture, and celebrated his bookstore opening with champagne and encouragement. Marcus, who'd been calling every day during his mother's illness with such apparent concern. Daniel sank onto the bed, the divorce papers crumpling in his fist, and something broke inside him that had nothing to do with his mother's death. This betrayal cut differently, sharper and more personal, because it was a choice. His mother hadn't chosen to leave him. Jennifer and Marcus had chosen to destroy him while he was already destroyed. He didn't sleep that night, just lay on top of the covers staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying every interaction with Marcus over the past 6 months, every late meeting Jennifer had claimed to attend, every time they'd exchanged glances that he'd dismissed as friendly warmth. He'd been blind, or maybe he'd chosen not to see because acknowledging the truth would have required action he didn't have energy for. The next morning, Daniel dragged himself to Morrison's Books, unlocking the door at 9 a.m. even though he wanted to stay in bed forever. The store smelled like old paper and coffee, familiar and comforting, but even that couldn't lift the weight crushing his chest. Mrs. Chen, his most loyal customer, was waiting outside when he arrived. She was 83 and came in 3 times a week for romance novels and conversation. Her weathered face creased with concern when she saw him. "Daniel, sweetheart, you look terrible. Is everything okay?" He tried to smile, tried to pretend, but his face wouldn't cooperate. "My mother passed away last week," he managed, his voice rough. Mrs. Chen's eyes filled with tears, and she grabbed his hands with surprising strength. "Oh, my dear boy, Eleanor was such a wonderful woman. She used to come in here sometimes, you know, when you were busy in the back. We'd talk about you. She was so proud." Daniel felt his composure cracking, and Mrs. Chen patted his arm gently. "You take your time, honey. Grief doesn't follow schedules." He spent the day mechanically helping customers, recommending books without really seeing them, running the register on autopilot. Around 3 p.m., the landlord called about the rent. Daniel owed 2 months and couldn't promise a third. The landlord, Mr. Patterson, sighed heavily on the other end. "Look, Morrison, I like you. Your mother was a good tenant before you took over this space. But I've got bills too. I need payment by the end of next week, or we're done." Daniel hung up feeling numb. The bookstore was failing. His marriage was over. His mother was dead. Everything he'd built or loved was collapsing simultaneously, like the universe had decided to see how much one person could lose before breaking completely. That evening, he returned to the empty apartment and found his phone buzzing with a message from Jennifer. "Hey, I hope you're doing okay. I know this is hard. Marcus and I want to invite you to dinner next week. We should talk like adults." The audacity of it staggered him. They'd betrayed him in his darkest moment and now wanted to have a friendly dinner. He threw the phone across the room, hearing it clatter against the wall, past caring if it broke. Let them wait. Let them wonder. He had nothing left to give them. Nothing left to give anyone. The next 3 days blurred together in gray monotony. Daniel went through the motions of living, showering, eating minimally, opening the bookstore, closing it again, but felt like a ghost haunting his own life. On Friday morning, a thick envelope arrived via courier. The return address stamped with the name Whitmore and Associates, Attorneys at Law. Daniel almost threw it away unopened, assuming it was something related to the divorce, but the courier had made him sign for it with unusual formality. He tore it open, standing in the bookstore doorway, rain starting to fall outside again, the city gray and cold. Dear Mr. Morrison, the letter began, we represent the estate of Eleanor Morrison, your late mother. It is imperative that you meet with us at your earliest convenience regarding matters of inheritance and estate management. Please contact our office immediately to schedule an appointment. This is a time-sensitive matter of significant financial and legal importance. There was a phone number, an address downtown in the financial district, and the signature of someone named Catherine Whitmore, senior partner. Daniel stared at the letter in confusion. Inheritance? His mother had been a working-class woman, frugal and practical. She'd owned nothing except a small savings account and the old house where she'd raised him, which she'd sold years ago. What inheritance could there possibly be? Maybe some small life insurance policy, a few $1,000s that would help with the funeral bills. He called the number expecting an assistant, but Catherine Whitmore answered personally. Her voice was crisp and professional, but not unkind. Mr. Morrison, thank you for calling. Can you come in today? I understand you're grieving, but this truly cannot wait. Something in her tone made him agree. 2 hours later, dressed in the same worn suit he'd worn to the funeral, Daniel stood outside a gleaming glass building in the financial district, staring up at the Whitmore and Associates sign with growing unease. The lobby was all marble and expensive art, the kind of place that made his thrift store clothing feel conspicuous. A receptionist escorted him to the 20th floor, down a hallway lined with oil paintings, into a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Catherine Whitmore stood as he entered, a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She gestured to a leather chair across from her massive desk. Mr. Morrison, please sit. I'm so sorry for your loss. Your mother was an extraordinary woman. Daniel sat, his hands clenched on his knees, confused and exhausted. Thank you, but I don't understand why I'm here. My mother didn't have money. She worked hard her whole life just to make ends meet. Catherine's expression shifted to something that might have been sympathy. She opened a folder on her desk, thick with documents. Mr. Morrison, that's what your mother wanted everyone to believe. The truth is significantly different. She slid a paper across the desk, and Daniel's eyes struggled to make sense of the numbers. Holdings, assets, corporate structures, investment portfolios. Millions, tens of millions, his mother's name at the top of everything. I don't understand, he whispered. Catherine leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. Your mother, Eleanor Morrison, was one of the most successful businesswomen in this city. She built Quantum Enterprises from nothing 30 years ago, then expanded into real estate, technology, manufacturing. She owned 17 corporations under various holding companies. She was extraordinarily private about her wealth, operating through layers of legal entities and trusts. Almost no one knew who really controlled Quantum. Daniel's mind reeled. Quantum Enterprises, Jennifer's company, Marcus's company, the gleaming towers he'd driven past 100 times. That's not possible. My mother worked regular jobs. She struggled to pay bills. We lived in a small house, drove an old car. Catherine nodded. She chose that life deliberately. She grew up poor, Mr. Morrison, and she believed that wealth corrupted people, made them weak and entitled. She wanted you to understand struggle, to develop character, to learn the value of work and persistence. Everything she did was designed to protect you and prepare you. She pulled out another document, this one handwritten, his mother's familiar script covering multiple pages. She left this letter for you. I think you should read it now. Daniel's hands trembled as he took the letter, his mother's voice echoing in his mind as he read her words. My dearest Daniel, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're probably confused and angry. I'm sorry for the deception, but I never regretted it. I watched too many wealthy families destroy their children with money and privilege. I wanted you to be strong, compassionate, capable, not some spoiled heir who'd never known hardship. You built that bookstore with your own hands and heart. You helped people. You stayed kind even when life was difficult. That's who I raised you to be, and I'm proud beyond words. Now you need to know the truth. You now own, Quantum Enterprises and all its subsidiaries. I own the buildings downtown, the manufacturing plants in the suburbs, the investment portfolios that fund hundreds of businesses. You're worth approximately $800 million, Daniel. But money is just a tool, not a purpose. Use it wisely. Help others the way I tried to help people quietly throughout my life. And be careful. Wealth attracts vultures. People will change when they learn what you have. The lawyer will guide you. Trust Catherine Whitmore completely. She's been my friend for 30 years. I love you always. You were the best thing I ever created. And Potter, the letter blurred as tears Daniel had been suppressing finally broke through. He sat in the expensive office, in his worn suit, holding his mother's last words, and wept for everything he'd lost and everything he'd just gained. Catherine Whitmore sat quietly, letting him grieve, a box of tissues discreetly placed within reach. When Daniel could finally speak, his voice was raw. Quantum Enterprises, that's where my wife works, where my best friend just got promoted. Catherine's expression went carefully neutral. Yes, I'm aware. Your mother knew about your marriage, your friend, your life. She tracked everything from a distance, protecting you without interfering. Daniel wiped his eyes, his mind starting to work again, processing implications. They don't know. Jennifer and Marcus. They have no idea that I own the company they work for. Catherine shook her head. No one knows except me, my associate Michael Chen, and now you. Your mother operated through layers of shell companies and trusts. Her name never appeared on corporate documents. Even Quantum's executive team doesn't know who really owns their paychecks. Daniel stood, walking to the window, looking down at the city where his wife had left him for his best friend because he seemed like a failure. The irony was almost funny. If anything about this situation could be funny, he turned back to Catherine. What happens now? She stood as well, her professional demeanor softening slightly. That depends on you. You can reveal yourself immediately, take control publicly, make your presence known. Or you can wait, observe, learn about your holdings before acting. Your mother's structure gives you complete flexibility. No one can force your hand. Daniel thought about Jennifer's note, cold and dismissive. He thought about Marcus's concerned phone calls during his mother's illness, fake sympathy masking betrayal. He thought about the divorce papers, the empty apartment, the bookstore failing, because he'd never had the capital to compete. A different kind of feeling stirred in his chest. Not quite anger, but something harder and more calculating. I want to wait, he said slowly. I want to watch them. I want to understand what I've inherited before I do anything. Can we keep this completely secret? Catherine smiled slightly, the first real warmth she'd shown. Your mother hoped you'd say that. She believed patience was a virtue wealth made possible. Yes, we can keep this absolutely confidential. You'll need to sign documents, of course, formal transfer papers, but we'll do everything through private channels. The world will continue believing you're just a struggling bookstore owner. They spent the next 2 hours going through paperwork, Catherine explaining the scope of what he now owned. Quantum Enterprises alone was worth $400 million, a technology and consulting firm with offices in 12 cities. The real estate holdings added another $300 million, office buildings, apartment complexes, shopping centers, investment portfolios, manufacturing subsidiaries, venture capital funds. The list seemed endless. His mother had built an empire in silence, and now it was his. Catherine gave him access codes, account numbers, the names of trustees who'd been managing everything. Take your time learning the landscape, Shirin, she advised. Don't make any major decisions until you're ready. And Mr. Morrison, your mother left one other instruction. She wrote several additional letters, each labeled for specific situations. One is labeled, When the Vultures Notice. She predicted that people from your past might come circling back once they sensed opportunity. She wanted you prepared. Daniel left the office as the sun was setting, stepping into the cool evening air, feeling like he'd entered an alternate reality. The city looked the same, but everything had changed. He was no longer a grieving failure with a dying bookstore and a collapsed marriage. He was one of the wealthiest men in the state, owner of the very company that employed his ex-wife and the man she left him for. The power of that knowledge hummed through him, dangerous and intoxicating. He could destroy them with a phone call, fire them both, ruin Marcus's career, make Jennifer regret every cruel word. But his mother's letter echoed in his mind. Be careful. Wealth attracts vultures. Use it wisely. He drove back to his apartment slowly, thinking hard. Revenge would be easy, immediate, satisfying, but it would also be obvious, petty, beneath him. His mother had spent 30 years building something meaningful, helping people quietly, using wealth as a tool for good rather than a weapon. She'd raised him to be better than his worst impulses. Daniel parked outside his building and sat in the car for a long moment, making decisions that would shape everything to come. He would keep the secret. He would watch Jennifer and Marcus, observe them carefully, see what they did when they thought he was weak and broken. He would learn about his inheritance, understand the businesses his mother had built, figure out how to honor her legacy. And eventually, when the time was right, he would reveal the truth, not as revenge, but as justice, as a natural consequence of their own choices. That night, Daniel checked into a cheap hotel downtown, uncomfortable but anonymous, and called Catherine Whitmore from the scratchy bedspread. I want to keep living like I have nothing, he told her. Can you help me create a convincing appearance? I need people to believe I'm struggling even more than before. Catherine's voice held approval. Very smart. Yes, we can arrange that. I'll have Michael set up accounts that feed you small amounts gradually, keeping your visible finances minimal. What about the bookstore? Daniel thought about Morrison's books, about Mrs. Chen and the other customers who'd become like family. The landlord wants his rent. I can't pay him. Let it close. That'll make the story more believable. Failed business owner, divorced, broke. Everyone will think I'm at rock bottom. Catherine paused. That will be painful. Are you sure? Daniel's voice was steady. My mother lived with secrets for 30 years. I can handle a few months. The next week was brutal in a different way than grief. Daniel watched the bookstore die, unable to save it without revealing the truth. Mr. Patterson came by with eviction papers, apologetic but firm. I'm sorry, kid. I really am. Your mom would understand. Sometimes businesses fail. Daniel signed the papers, feeling customers' sympathetic eyes on him, playing the role of defeated failure, even though he had enough money to buy the entire block. Mrs. Chen cried when he told her they were closing. This city is losing all its heart, she said, hugging him fiercely. These big corporations buy everything and turn it into sterile nonsense. I'm so sorry, Daniel. He couldn't tell her that he owned those corporations now, that he could change things if he chose. Not yet. On Thursday evening, his phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Hi, Daniel. Marcus and I are having a dinner party Saturday night. Just a small gathering at our new place. We'd like you to come. No drama, just friends catching up. Think about it. The message was so casually cruel, so blind to its own violence, that Daniel almost laughed. They'd taken his wife, destroyed his marriage, and now wanted to parade him at their dinner party like some rehabilitated charity case. But Catherine's advice echoed in his mind. Observe, learn, wait. He texted back after a long pause. Sure, send me the address. Jennifer's response came immediately, probably relief that he wasn't going to make things difficult. Great. 7 p.m. It's the penthouse at Meridian Towers. See you then. Daniel showed up Saturday wearing the same worn suit, driving his old Honda, every inch the broken man they expected. Meridian Towers was luxury personified, all glass and steel and marble lobbies, the kind of building that charged $10,000 a month for a one-bedroom. The elevator to the penthouse required a key card, which the doorman provided after calling up for permission. Daniel rode up alone, watching the city spread out below as floors ticked past, steeling himself for whatever performance this evening would require. The doors opened directly into Marcus and Jennifer's apartment, and Daniel stepped into wealth so casual and effortless, it was almost obscene. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown, modern furniture that probably cost more than his bookstore's annual revenue, art on the walls that looked original. Jennifer greeted him at the elevator, her smile bright and empty, wearing a dress that probably cost what Daniel used to make in a month. Daniel, I'm so glad you came. Come in. Come in. Let me take your coat. She acted like they were old friends catching up after college, not a wife who'd abandoned her husband during his mother's funeral. Marcus appeared from the kitchen, holding an expensive whiskey, his smile equally artificial. Danny boy, good to see you, man. How are you holding up? The nickname grated. Marcus had never called him that before, and it felt like a deliberate diminishment, a subtle reminder of their new hierarchy. Daniel shook his hand, feeling the expensive watch on Marcus's wrist, seeing the confidence of a man who thought he'd won. I'm managing, Daniel said quietly, day by day. Jennifer touched his arm with false sympathy. We heard about the bookstore. That must be so hard. But honestly, Daniel, maybe it's for the best. Now you can find something more stable, more lucrative. Marcus could probably help you find a position at Quantum. Something entry-level to start, but it's a good company. The condescension was breathtaking. Daniel kept his face neutral, playing his role. That's kind of you. I'll think about it. Other guests started arriving. People from Quantum, Jennifer's marketing colleagues, Marcus's fellow managers. Everyone was polished and successful, casually dropping references to bonuses and vacations and investment portfolios. They treated Daniel with the kind of pitying kindness reserved for failures, asking about his situation with head tilts and concerned voices, offering advice he hadn't requested. He stood by the windows nursing a beer, watching Marcus and Jennifer work the room like political candidates, and understood exactly what his mother had meant about vultures. These people weren't evil, just shallow. They measured worth in titles and salaries and square footage and designer labels. To them, Daniel was a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happened when you aimed too small and lacked ambition. Around 8:30, the elevator doors opened again, and the room's energy shifted immediately. A man in his 60s stepped in, commanding attention without seeming to try. Expensive suit perfectly tailored, silver hair immaculate. Daniel didn't recognize him, but everyone else clearly did. Jennifer and Marcus practically sprinted across the room, their smiles ratcheting up to maximum wattage. Mr. Harrison, you came. We're so honored. The man, Harrison, smiled politely, but his eyes were scanning the room, searching. They landed on Daniel standing alone by the windows, and something flickered across Harrison's face. Recognition. Surprise. He walked past Marcus and Jennifer mid-greeting, crossing straight to Daniel with purpose. Excuse me, Harrison said, his voice cultured and warm. You're Eleanor Morrison's son, aren't you? The room went silent. Daniel felt every eye turned toward him, confusion and curiosity radiating from Jennifer and Marcus. He nodded slowly. Yes. Did you know my mother? Harrison's face softened with genuine emotion. Know her? She saved my life 30 years ago. I was a kid from nowhere, trying to start a business with nothing but dreams and desperation. I walked into 50 banks and got rejected by all of them. Your mother was working as a loan officer then, or at least that's what I thought. She approved my loan personally, took a chance on me when no one else would. That business became Harrison Tech. We're worth $2 billion now. I've been trying to find her for years to thank her properly, but she was impossible to track. And now, his voice caught, now I learned she's gone. I'm so deeply sorry. Daniel felt emotion clog his throat. Another secret revealed, another layer of his mother's hidden generosity. She never mentioned it. She never mentioned any of the people she helped. Harrison gripped his shoulder, his touch firm and fatherly. That was her way. She didn't help people for recognition. But I want you to know, your mother changed my life. She saw potential when others saw risk. She believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. The world lost someone irreplaceable. Behind Harrison, Daniel could see Jennifer and Marcus frozen in confusion, their party forgotten, their importance suddenly irrelevant. Harrison turned to address the room, his voice carrying natural authority. Everyone here should understand something. Eleanor Morrison was a giant. She built more than most of us could dream of, and she did it quietly with grace and integrity. Her son carries that legacy. Any friend of Daniel's is a friend of mine. The party atmosphere shifted immediately. Suddenly, people were interested in Daniel, asking him questions, treating him like he mattered. Jennifer and Marcus stood apart, their expressions carefully controlled, but their eyes showing panic. They didn't understand what was happening, but they understood power dynamics, and Harrison's endorsement had changed Daniel's status from pitiful failure to someone worthy of respect. Harrison stayed close to Daniel for the next hour, genuinely interested in his life, his bookstore, his mother's last days. When Daniel mentioned closing Morrison's books, Harrison's expression turned thoughtful. That's tragic. Neighborhoods need community spaces like that. Tell me something. Would you want to keep it open if you could? Daniel felt the trap of the question, but answered honestly. Yes, it was never about profit. It was about people, connections, shared stories. Harrison nodded, seeming to make a decision. I'll look into it. Maybe there's a solution. They exchanged phone numbers, Harrison promising to call, and Daniel felt the first stirring of hope since his mother's death. Not hope for revenge, but hope for purpose, for continuing what she'd started. As the party wound down, Jennifer and Marcus were obviously rattled, their confidence shaken by Harrison's unexpected attention to their pathetic ex-husband and friend. Daniel left quietly, thanking them with polite distance, watching Jennifer's eyes follow him with new calculation. On Monday morning, Catherine Whitmore called him, her voice amused. Robert Harrison contacted me this morning. He wants to meet with both of us. He's proposing something interesting. They met at Harrison's office, another gleaming tower downtown. Harrison got straight to business. I want to buy the building that housed Morrison's books. I want to renovate it, create a community center with the bookstore as its anchor. Reading programs for kids, small business incubators, neighborhood services. I'll fund it, but I want Daniel involved in the planning. Eleanor gave me my start. Let me honor that by protecting what her son built. Daniel felt overwhelmed by the generosity, but Catherine was already thinking practically. That's a wonderful gesture, Robert. I think Eleanor would approve. Daniel? He nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Thank you. Really? Harrison waved away the gratitude. Thank her. I'm just paying forward a debt I can never fully repay. The news reached Marcus 2 days later during a management meeting. Daniel wasn't there. Catherine had Michael Chen feed him the details later. But apparently Marcus had gotten a call from Mr. Patterson, the landlord, who just received an acquisition offer for his property from Harrison Tech. Patterson was thrilled, selling for triple the building's value. Marcus had been trying to acquire that same building for Quantum's expansion for months, offering lowball prices and getting rejected. Now Harrison Tech owned it, and renovation was starting immediately with Morrison's books as the centerpiece. Marcus called Daniel that evening, his voice tight with confusion. Hey buddy, heard about the bookstore deal. That's great news. How do you know Robert Harrison? Daniel kept his voice neutral. We met at your party. Turns out he knew my mother years ago. There was a long pause, Marcus processing, trying to figure out what this meant. That's fortunate, really fortunate. Listen, Jennifer and I were thinking maybe we could grab dinner sometime. Just the three of us. Clear the air, move forward as friends. Daniel smiled alone in his cheap hotel room. The vultures were circling, just as his mother had predicted. Maybe, he said non-committally. I'm pretty busy with the renovation planning, but I'll let you know. He hung up before Marcus could push harder, feeling a cold satisfaction. Let them wonder. Let them worry. The truth would reveal itself in time. Over the next 2 months, Daniel worked closely with Harrison's team on the community center project. Harrison introduced him to architects, community organizers, nonprofit directors, treating him like a valued partner rather than a charity case. The bookstore renovation was beautiful. Expanded space, comfortable seating, a cafe corner, children's reading areas. Harrison insisted on naming it Eleanor Morrison Community Center, with the bookstore as its heart. Daniel poured himself into the project, finding purpose in his mother's legacy, discovering that wealth used well could heal rather than corrupt. The center opened in early spring to neighborhood celebration, and Morrison's books thrived immediately, supported by Harrison Tech's funding and Daniel's genuine love for what he'd built. Jennifer texted him the week after the grand opening. The center looks amazing. I'm so happy for you. Can we talk? I miss you, Daniel. I made a mistake. Daniel stared at the message for a long time. The old hymn would have melted, would have taken her back out of loneliness and hope. But that Daniel had died at his mother's grave, and this new version understood what his mother had known. Character revealed itself in crisis. Jennifer had abandoned him when he seemed broken. Now she was circling back because he seemed less broken, because Robert Harrison's association made him interesting, because she sensed opportunity. He texted back, "I don't think that's a good idea. Take care." Her response came in seconds. "Please, Daniel, I want to explain. Marcus and I aren't working out. I see that now. Can we just meet for coffee?" He didn't respond. Catherine called him that afternoon. "Your mother left that other letter I mentioned. The one labeled, 'When the Vultures Notice.' I think it's time." She brought it to him at the community center, the envelope thick and heavy with his mother's handwriting. Daniel sat in the empty bookstore after closing, surrounded by shelves his mother had inspired, and opened her final lesson. "Daniel, if you're reading this, people from your past are circling back. You've started revealing your resources, your capabilities, your connections. They see value they missed before. Now you must decide who deserves your time and trust. Here's my advice. Test them. Ask yourself why they're returning now, what they want, what they offer. Real relationships survive distance and circumstance. Fair weather friends evaporate the moment you're inconvenient. Your wife and your friend betrayed you when you were grieving and vulnerable. Did they contact you out of concern for your well-being or out of calculation about their own interests? You know the answer. Don't let loneliness make you accept less than you deserve. You're Eleanor Morrison's son. Act like it. Stand firm." Mom Daniel folded the letter carefully, feeling his mother's presence like she was sitting beside him. She'd been right about everything. About character, about testing, about the vultures. The next evening, Marcus called requesting a meeting. "Just you and me, buddy. I want to explain some things. Clear my conscience." They met at an upscale restaurant Marcus chose, the kind of place with cloth napkins and wine lists. Marcus was nervous. Daniel could see it immediately. The confidence from the dinner party replaced with something more calculating. "Look, Daniel," Marcus began after they'd ordered, "I owe you an apology. The way things happened with Jennifer, the timing, it was terrible. But I need you to understand, it wasn't planned. We just connected, you know? Sometimes these things happen. And honestly, man, you weren't making her happy. She needed someone more ambitious, more driven." Daniel listened without interrupting, watching Marcus justify betrayal with corporate speak, turning cruelty into inevitability. Marcus continued, "But that's all in the past. What matters now is moving forward. I'm glad you're doing better. The Harrison thing is huge, really impressive. Jennifer mentioned you're not interested in reconciling with her, which I respect. But you and me, we're bros. We can rebuild our friendship, and honestly, with your new connections, you could really help me with some projects at Quantum. Harrison Tech has resources we'd love to access. Maybe you could put in a word?" There it was, the real reason for this dinner, the calculation beneath fake remorse. Marcus didn't want friendship. He wanted networking, leverage, access to Harrison's world through Daniel. Daniel set down his fork, his voice quiet but firm. "Marcus, I'm going to be honest with you. You're not my friend. You were never my friend. Real friends don't sleep with your wife while your mother is dying. Real friends don't abandon you when you're struggling and then come crawling back when you seem successful. You're here because you see an opportunity, not because you care about me. So no, I won't put in a word with Robert. I won't help your projects. I won't rebuild anything with you. We're done." Marcus's face flushed red, anger replacing fake friendliness. "You're making a mistake, Daniel. I'm a senior manager at Quantum. I have connections you need. You're nobody without—" He caught himself, realizing he'd revealed too much. Daniel stood, dropping cash on the table for his meal. "I'm nobody? Maybe. But I'm nobody on my own terms, not yours. Goodbye, Marcus." He walked out without looking back, feeling lighter than he had in months. One vulture dismissed, but Jennifer remained, and she was more persistent. She showed up at the community center the following Saturday, dressed casually but carefully, her smile tentative. Daniel, please, just give me 5 minutes. He considered refusing, but curiosity won. They sat in the bookstore cafe, surrounded by weekend readers, and Jennifer began her prepared speech. I made a terrible mistake. I was scared and selfish, and I hurt you when you needed me most. But I want to make it right. Marcus and I are over. We were never really compatible anyway. I miss what we had. I miss you. I know I don't deserve another chance, but people change. I've changed. Please, Daniel. Let me prove it. She sounded sincere, tears welling in her eyes, her hand reaching across the table toward his. The old Daniel would have believed her, would have been so starved for connection he'd have accepted the crumb she offered. But this Daniel heard his mother's voice asking the right questions. Why now? What changed? What does she really want? He pulled his hand back gently. Jennifer, why did you leave me? She blinked, surprised by the direct question. I told you, I needed stability, a future. Daniel interrupted. No, specifically, why did you think Marcus could give you something I couldn't? She hesitated, trapped by her own words. He had a better job, more prospects, he was going somewhere. Daniel nodded. Right. You left because you thought I was a failure, because I ran a struggling bookstore, because I didn't make enough money. You left because I wasn't financially successful. Jennifer started to protest, but Daniel continued. Now suddenly you're back. Not when I was at my lowest, not when I was grieving my mother and losing my business. You're back now, after Robert Harrison showed public support, after the community center opened, after I started seeming like less of a failure. You're back because your assessment of my value changed. That's not love, Jennifer. That's opportunism. Her face crumpled, tears spilling over. That's not fair. I care about you. Daniel felt sad rather than angry. Maybe you do in your way, but you care about comfortable circumstances more. You care about status and appearances and what your friends think. I need someone who'd stay with me in the cemetery, not someone who shows up after the funeral hoping for the inheritance. He stood and Jennifer grabbed his arm desperately. Daniel, please. I know I was wrong, but I love you. I made a mistake, but I love you. He gently removed her hand. No, Jennifer. You love the idea of me now that I'm connected to powerful people. You love the version of me that makes you look good at parties. But you didn't love the real me when I was actually suffering, and you won't love the real me if circumstances change again. I deserve better. I deserve someone with the character my mother had. Loyal, genuine, consistent. That's not you. He walked away, leaving her crying in the cafe, and felt his mother's approval like a warm hand on his shoulder. Both vultures dismissed. Both tests passed. Catherine called him the next morning. There's one more letter. Your mother labeled it, when you've passed the tests. Should I bring it over? Daniel met her at the community center that afternoon. The letter was shorter this time, his mother's handwriting looser, more emotional. My darling boy, if you're reading this, you chose well. You rejected the vultures. You maintained your integrity. I'm so proud of you. Now comes the final piece. I've been helping people quietly for 30 years through a foundation I established. It's called the Morrison Foundation, and it holds approximately $100 million in assets separate from your inheritance. The foundation has been supporting community projects, small businesses, educational programs, medical research, all the things I believe made the world better. Catherine has a list of everyone we've helped, thousands of people over 3 decades. I want you to meet them, Daniel. I want you to understand the scope of what's possible when you use money with purpose. The foundation is yours now. Its board is waiting to meet you. Use it well. Make me proud. You already have, but make me proud again. Mom Daniel held the letter, overwhelmed by the final revelation. His mother hadn't just built an empire. She'd built a legacy of generosity. Catherine handed him a flash drive. These are the foundation's files. Every grant, every person helped. Every project funded. Your mother documented everything. She wanted you to see the impact wealth could have when used correctly. Daniel spent the next week reading through files, discovering his mother's hidden history. She'd funded Robert Harrison's first business. She'd supported a young doctor who'd gone on to pioneer cancer treatments. She'd saved a struggling arts program that had produced Tony-winning actors. She'd paid for college educations, rescued failing nonprofits, funded women's shelters and youth programs. Thousands of people owed their success to Eleanor Morrison, and almost none of them knew her name. Catherine arranged for him to meet the foundation's board. 5 people his mother had trusted completely. They were diverse, passionate, committed to continuing her work. They welcomed Daniel not as an inexperienced heir, but as Eleanor's son, worthy of respect because of who'd raised him. Over dinner at a private club, the board chair, an elderly African-American woman named Dr. Patricia Williams, who ran a network of community health clinics, explained their philosophy. Your mother believed in strategic philanthropy, not just giving money but investing in people and projects with genuine potential. She looked for character first, capability second. She trusted her instincts and she was rarely wrong. Daniel felt the weight of responsibility settling on him, but it didn't feel crushing. It felt right, purposeful. I want to continue her work, expand it if possible. What do we need? The board spent 3 hours outlining opportunities, emerging nonprofits needing seed funding, community projects dying from lack of resources, individuals with potential but no access to capital. Daniel listened, asked questions, began to understand how his mother had operated. By the end of the evening, he'd approved 5 new grants totaling $2 million, and it felt more meaningful than anything he'd done with money before. As he left, Dr. Williams pulled him aside. Your mother talked about you constantly. She worried you'd be angry about the deception, that you'd feel cheated or betrayed. But she believed you'd understand eventually. She wanted you strong, compassionate, grounded. You are. She succeeded. Daniel drove home that night feeling his mother's presence more strongly than he had since her death, understanding finally what she'd been building, why she'd lived the way she did. Robert Harrison called him the next week with a proposal. I've been talking to some of the people Eleanor helped over the years. There are dozens of us, Daniel, people she gave chances to, people who became successful because of her faith in us. We want to form a network, a coalition dedicated to continuing her work, not replacing the foundation, but supporting it, leveraging our combined resources and connections. We could impact thousands more people. Will you coordinate it? Daniel felt the magnitude of what Harrison was proposing. His mother had planted seeds for 30 years, and now they were blooming into a forest. Yes, absolutely yes. They organized the first gathering at a conference center downtown, expecting maybe 20 people. 50 showed up, entrepreneurs, doctors, artists, educators, all touched by Eleanor Morrison's quiet generosity. Harrison introduced Daniel, and for the first time Daniel spoke publicly about his mother, her philosophy, her legacy. The room listened in rapt attention, many people crying as they recognized their own stories in what Daniel described. Afterward, person after person approached him, sharing memories of Eleanor, explaining how she changed their lives. A tech founder who'd received early funding, a surgeon whose medical school Eleanor had funded, a playwright whose first production Eleanor had supported. Each story added another layer to the portrait of his mother Daniel was discovering. They formalized the network, establishing committees and communication channels, planning coordinated philanthropic efforts. Daniel found himself at the center of something extraordinary, a web of successful, committed people united by gratitude and purpose. His mother had built not just a fortune, but a movement, and now it was his to steward. The coalition's formation made local news. A journalist writing about community development discovered the Morrison Foundation and its mysterious founder, piecing together Eleanor's story. The resulting article ran on the front page of the business section, The Hidden Giant, How Eleanor Morrison Quietly Built an Empire of Generosity. The article detailed her holdings, her foundation, her impact on the city's development. It mentioned Daniel respectfully, noting his commitment to continuing her work. The publication coincided with a major foundation announcement. $50 million pledged to rebuild struggling neighborhoods, create job training programs, and support small businesses. The city's elite suddenly knew the Morrison name, and with it, Daniel's position as heir to a fortune and a legacy. His phone exploded with messages. Old friends from high school reaching out. Distant relatives suddenly interested in reconnecting. Business proposals, charity requests, networking invitations. And inevitably, Jennifer and Marcus both tried to contact him. Jennifer sent a long email claiming she'd always known he had potential, that she'd made a terrible mistake, that they were meant to be together. Marcus sent a LinkedIn connection request with a message about burying the hatchet and exploring partnership opportunities. Daniel deleted both without responding. They'd revealed their character. No amount of backpedaling would change that truth. Catherine called him, laughing. "Welcome to being publicly wealthy. How are you handling the vultures?" Daniel smiled despite himself. "Learning to recognize them from a distance. It's actually easier when they're this obvious." The Morrison Foundation announced a charity gala for fall, a fundraising event to support expanded programming. The guest list included the city's most influential people, corporate leaders, philanthropists, politicians. Daniel worked with the event planners, focusing on substance over spectacle, ensuring the evening would honor his mother's values. Harrison Tech sponsored the event alongside Quantum Enterprises, though Marcus had no say in the decision. The sponsorship came from Quantum's corporate foundation, approved by executives who'd learned of Eleanor Morrison's ownership through the public revelation of her holdings. Daniel saw Marcus's name on the guest list. He was senior enough to attend, but assumed he'd decline from embarrassment. He was wrong. Marcus and Jennifer both showed up, dressed expensively, their smiles desperate and calculated. Daniel was standing near the stage when he saw them across the ballroom, his stomach tightening with old pain. But Catherine was beside him immediately, her hand on his arm. "You don't have to talk to them. Security can quietly escort them out if you want." Daniel considered, but his mother's voice echoed again. "Stand firm. Show them the consequences of their choices, not through anger, but through clarity." He shook his head. "Let them stay. This is a public event. I won't let them ruin my mother's night." He moved through the crowd, greeting guests, thanking donors, speaking about the foundation's work. Robert Harrison gave a speech about Eleanor's impact on his life, moving the room to tears. The mayor praised the Morrison Foundation's commitment to the city. And then Daniel took the stage for his own remarks. He spoke from the heart, no script, just truth. He told the room about his mother's deception and its purpose. He explained her belief that character mattered more than wealth, that struggle built strength, that generosity required humility. He shared stories from the people she'd helped, painting a portrait of a woman who'd used her fortune as a tool for good rather than a measure of worth. The ballroom was silent except for his voice, everyone listening with complete attention. Near the end, Daniel's eyes found Jennifer and Marcus in the crowd, both frozen and pale, understanding finally the magnitude of what they'd dismissed, who they'd betrayed. "My mother taught me," Daniel said, his voice carrying clearly, "that money reveals character rather than creating it. You show who you are and how you treat people when they have nothing to offer you, when they're struggling, when they're vulnerable. True worth isn't measured in bank accounts or job titles. It's measured in loyalty, integrity, compassion, qualities my mother had in abundance. I hope to honor her by living the same way." The room erupted in applause. People standing, the ovation lasting minutes. Daniel left the stage to handshakes and praise, feeling more confident than he had since his mother's death. He was carrying her legacy forward, not perfectly, but genuinely, and that was enough. Marcus and Jennifer tried to approach him as the evening wound down, but Robert Harrison intercepted them smoothly. Daniel didn't hear the conversation, but he saw Marcus's face redden and Jennifer's eyes fill with tears as Harrison spoke quietly to them both. They left shortly after, walking out with their heads down, and Daniel felt only relief. They'd come hoping to reconnect with opportunity. They'd left understanding they'd burned bridges that would never rebuild. Dr. Williams approached him as the gala ended, her eyes bright with emotion. "That was beautiful, Daniel. Eleanor would have been so proud. You didn't just honor her memory, you embodied her values. That's the greatest tribute you could give." Daniel hugged the elderly woman, feeling the truth of her words. The evening had been about his mother, not about him, not about showing off his wealth or humiliating his betrayers. It had been about purpose, legacy, continuing something meaningful. That night at the hotel, Daniel finally slept deeply for the first time since his mother's funeral, exhausted but content. The next morning, Catherine arrived with coffee and a satisfied smile. "That was masterful. You showed incredible grace under pressure." Your ex-wife and Marcus were apparently seen arguing in the parking garage afterward. Seems the reality of who you actually are caused some friction in their relationship. Daniel felt no satisfaction from their conflict, only distance. "They're not my problem anymore. They made their choices." Catherine nodded approvingly. "Spoken like Eleanor Morrison's son. Now there's someone I'd like you to meet. Her name is Lisa Chen. She runs a nonprofit supporting domestic violence survivors. She was one of your mother's first grants 15 years ago. She's been trying to expand her services but struggling with funding. I think you'd find her work compelling." They met Lisa that afternoon at her nonprofit's offices, a converted house on the east side serving a vulnerable community. Lisa was in her 40s, warm and passionate, her eyes showing both exhaustion and determination. She walked Daniel through her programs: emergency housing, legal assistance, job training, counseling. Everything was operating on a shoestring budget, staff working overtime for minimal pay out of commitment to the mission. Daniel listened to Lisa explain their impact. Dozens of women and children helped annually, lives literally saved, and felt his mother's presence strongly. This was the work Eleanor Morrison had valued, the unglamorous, difficult, essential labor of helping people most societies overlooked. "How much would you need to double your capacity?" Daniel asked. Lisa looked startled by the directness. "Realistically, about 500,000 annually. That would let us hire adequate staff, expand our housing, improve our programs. But that's far beyond what we typically receive in grants." Daniel glanced at Catherine, who nodded slightly. "The Morrison Foundation will commit 500,000 annually for 3 years. That should give you stability to grow and develop additional funding sources." Lisa's mouth fell open, tears immediately streaming down her face. "Are you serious? That would change everything. We could help so many more people." Daniel smiled gently. "My mother believed in your work. So do I. Let's make it happen." Driving away afterward, Catherine was glowing. That's how Eleanor operated. Find good people doing important work and empower them. You're a natural, Daniel. He felt the rightness of it, the purpose his mother had found and was now passing to him. Over the following months, Daniel settled into his role as foundation director and coalition coordinator. He met with nonprofits, evaluated proposals, approved funding. He connected people within the network, facilitating collaborations. He learned about his mother's businesses, gradually taking a more active role in overseeing holdings. The work was challenging but meaningful. Every day an opportunity to impact lives the way his mother had. Morrison's books became a gathering place for the coalition, a symbol of community and purpose. Harrison Tech and the Morrison Foundation partnered on multiple projects, their combined resources creating transformative change. Daniel moved out of the cheap hotel into a modest but comfortable apartment, still living well below his means, but no longer pretending poverty. He found balance between Eleanor's values and his new reality. Jennifer and Marcus faded from his life completely. He heard through the rumor mill that their relationship had imploded. Jennifer leaving Marcus when she realized he couldn't provide access to Daniel or his network. Marcus reportedly struggled at Quantum after the public revelation of Eleanor Morrison's ownership created awkwardness around his treatment of her son. Daniel felt neither pleasure nor pain hearing this. They were simply irrelevant now, characters from a previous life he'd outgrown. He focused on building rather than dwelling on the past, creating rather than destroying. The Morrison Foundation's impact grew exponentially under his leadership, the coalition amplifying its reach. Media coverage continued periodically, always framing Daniel as the worthy heir to Eleanor Morrison's legacy, praising his humility and commitment. One evening, almost a year after his mother's death, Daniel stood in Morrison's books after closing, surrounded by readers who'd become friends thinking about his journey. He'd started here broken and grieving, betrayed and lost. He discovered an inheritance that could have consumed him with bitterness or corrupted him with power. Instead, guided by his mother's wisdom and his own character, he'd chosen purpose over revenge, generosity over selfishness, legacy over luxury. The bookstore around him represented everything he'd built: community, connection, meaning. His phone buzzed with a text from Robert Harrison. Board meeting tomorrow to approve the new educational initiative. Your mother would be proud. Daniel smiled, feeling Eleanor's presence in every corner of the space she'd inspired him to create. The truth had shocked his betrayers, but the real shock was discovering he didn't need their acknowledgement or regret. He'd built something more valuable than revenge, a life of significance honoring the woman who'd sacrificed to prepare him for exactly this moment. Daniel locked up the bookstore, walking out into the cool night air, and felt wholly himself for the first time since his mother had died. He was Eleanor Morrison's son, carrying forward her legacy with integrity and love, standing firm against vultures while lifting up those who deserve support. The $800 million inheritance had revealed character, his own, his mother's, and everyone who'd surrounded them. In the end, money had been just a tool, exactly as Eleanor Morrison had always believed. What mattered was how you used it, who you helped with it, what legacy you built with it. Daniel was building something lasting, something meaningful, something his mother could watch from wherever she rested and smile with pride.